Imagine your quarterback and your receiver not being on the same page. You may have the problem, right? The key oftentimes is alignment on what the goal is.
Part of the problem with health plans is there's these silos, the business and IT. Like they're two separate nations. They occasionally trade goods across the border, but they don't really know each other.
Hey, it's Nick and Mitch, and this is Provider Data Dorks. Our guest today, Sam Deshpande, aerospace engineer turned risk and tech leader at Capital One and Humana. And we start the conversation with what's really breaking inside the modern health plan.
Ultimately, everything should be customer back. It doesn't matter which hat you're wearing, you will actually come together with potentially different points of view, but it allows the right conversations to happen because your job normally is, one, decide if it's a big enough problem. Two, once you have decided it is, declare that it is. And number three, create the structure within that problem can actually be solved. I think if you do those things, people who know how to solve that problem can actually go solve that problem.
When a vendor or a potential partner walks into the room, what are the first three things you're really evaluating that have nothing to do with the demo?
The first question you always ask, is this solving a problem that is large and complex enough for me? Because that speaks to relevance. Number two, is this thing going to scale and is it going to scale well? And number three is,
welcome to the Provider Data Dorks. I'm Nick Helfrich.
And I'm Mitch Gordorkin.
We
started this podcast because one of the most important problems in healthcare is also one of its most complex, provider data.
Provider data is the invisible backbone of healthcare operations. It drives everything. You can't find your providers. You can't get paid to see patients, and you can't even see patients without the backbone of provider data.
And yet, Nick, most of the organizations we talked to today, they're still managing it like they're in the 80s. Managing across disconnected systems, spreadsheets, manual processes, and siloed vendors that just don't talk to each other.
That's why we created this podcast. Each episode, we're going to talk to the leaders actually trying to fix provider data. I'm talking about the industry experts, the people that know where the skeletons are buried and how to fix a lot of these problems, regardless of how hard it may be. We want to ask the hard questions that get to the root of the problem.
You will leave with a clearer picture of what's at stake, a deeper understanding of the data behind care, and most importantly, the solutions our industry leaders are focused on. Now let's dork out.
So that brings us to our guest today, Sam Deshpande. Sam, thank you for joining us. We're extremely excited to have you on the Provider Data Dorks podcast. I hope that either you already or will in the future consider yourself a provider data dork. We think it's a term of endearment. Thanks for joining us, Sam.
it is great to be here.
Thank you. You started as an aerospace engineer, moved into strategy consulting, spent 17 years at Capital One in risk and credit, ending as their SVP and a chief risk officer for two of their business units, and then jumped from credit and the financial services industry into healthcare with Humana, first as the chief risk officer, then as chief technology and risk officer, and then chief information officer. All jobs I know I can't do. It's quite a tour. What's the common thread for you, Sam? And what did each chapter teach you as you kind of moved through everything?
It can feel like a box of mismatched toys as you listen to that. But I guess the common thread for me anyway was if you continue to have a level of curiosity about anything you do and an ambition to take whatever you are given a little better every day and better over time, that continues to make, no matter what you do, both interesting for you personally and impactful for those you serve. Especially when you come to critical industries like banking or healthcare, having that long view of what are you trying to improve for your customers, and then charting a path and being able to do it makes that job so critical.
You hit on it right there, Sam. I think that's something that's so interesting for us to dig into today. Financial services, healthcare, both extremely critical industries, and yet they both operate so differently. And you have this really unique lens of getting to see both sides of the table. Capital One has a reputation as one of the most data and risk disciplined companies in financial services. When you walked into healthcare back in 2017, what was the biggest mindset gap between how financial services treat data and how healthcare treats data? And is that gap closing over the years? Have you seen that get smaller?
The interesting thing is both industries have a lot in common. They ultimately are serving a large number of consumers in areas which are critical to the daily lives of those consumers. It could be being healthy, it could be being in healthy financial state. The piece that I had underestimated when I made that switch was just the complexity of the healthcare industry. Consumer oftentimes, even though a consumer in the financial services industry might have multiple accounts, you might have an investment account, you might have a banking account, you might have a credit card account. For each of those accounts, you can largely do the transactions that you're trying to do with one entity. And it largely works quite seamlessly when you're working with that entity. It could be a checking account, could be an investment account again. In the healthcare industry, every interaction typically involves multiple entities. And that just creates a level of complexity of how do you coordinate across all those different entities. And that affects the data, that affects the normalization of data. The second challenge is just the sheer amount of data. It's actually quite vast in both industries, but it tends to be structured data in the banking industry for the most part. And the banking industry has been able to build models on that structured data over time to make things better for the consumers. In healthcare, there's a large amount of unstructured data, which is critical, especially as you get to a particular age in your life. You end up seeing doctors on a relatively regular basis, and the amount of information on you can be quite overwhelming. How do you actually make sense of that data has been a challenge, which made the banking industry a better place to use the data and build the tools in the past. The good news is that with recent developments in Gen AI, I think that gap is starting to close.
Yeah, that's really exciting to think about. And when you think about the innovation, financial services, the company that just always comes to mind for me is Plaid. Ability to unlock data at scale and then be able, to your point, make quick decisions on that data and innovate and transform off of that data. This idea of Plaid for healthcare gets referenced a lot for clinical data, for claims, and now I'm obsessed with the idea of it for provider data. As somebody who came out of financial services and then ran tech at a national payer, what does that analogy get right and what does it get badly wrong?
I think it's a pretty good analogy, actually. If you think about almost any industry, there are many entities, many players who come together to go solve a particular problem for the consumer. And the consumer facing parts of those entities have a certain set of functions they should do exceptionally well. But then there's a whole bunch of other stuff in the background that you also need to be working well. Companies like Plaid make sure that the connections happen, the handshake happens between the different entities, the authentication happens, and the data gets transferred back and forth. And as a consumer, you don't really care that that is happening. You just want to make sure it is happening in a way that allows you to complete a transaction seamlessly and complete it very quickly. In healthcare industry, there are companies like Availity, which have been around for a while, to make sure that you start solving those problems. Certify OS is also trying to solve a particular part of that problem for the industry. And the key is, if you can pick problems which are common problems across the whole industry, go solve them in a way that is better than anyone else and end up creating a standard along the way, it is fundamentally better for the whole industry.
And I love that you've served in two of the most complex industries within the United States and arguably any country there. So when you're that complex, that large, there's plenty of problems to solve and plenty of problems to focus on. As an expert that served in those complex industries, you now advise on healthcare investments and help individuals evaluate those healthcare investments. When a vendor or a potential partner walks into the room for some of those conversations, what are the first three things you're really evaluating that have nothing to do with the demo? What are the things that you're thinking about that aren't the UI? And flip it for us. What makes a great product to buy in the first place, regardless of industry?
Well, the demo is always interesting. It takes an abstract idea of, a PowerPoint or presentation and allows you to really touch and feel it, which is really important. But the first question you always ask is this solving a problem that is large and complex enough for me that I need solved? Because that speaks to relevance. And if that's not there, you might engage politely in the conversation, but it doesn't really have relevance to all the things that you need to go figure out. Once you get past that, then the three questions you typically ask are, how much effort and time is it going to take to implement this thing. Number two, especially if you're a large company serving many customers, is this thing going to scale and is it going to scale well?
Yeah.
Because it tends to be part of an ecosystem. You might have hundreds, maybe more than 1,000 applications in the ecosystem that is supporting all your customers. And if this becomes a critical part of that ecosystem, is it going to perform in a way that makes the ecosystem better and not create a failure point in that ecosystem? And number three is you always have to worry about the entire financial picture. So how is this thing going to look when you look at it financially in a year, 3 years, next 5 years? Is it going to allow me to simplify something else somewhere else? Or is this going to be another financial burden in the whole equation? Those are the things you typically look at.
Yeah, it's such an interesting point, Sam, and you hit on a point that we hear all the time in our own day-to-day lives, which is that provider data management feeds hundreds of different vendors downstream, or not even vendors, but different health plan or enterprise system. One mistake on the provider data side of things has cascading and escalating impacts downstream. And these days, it's so easy to build software. With AI, anyone can build software, anyone can write it. And as you think about the broad implications that provider data has on the downstream systems of a health plan, how do you view that transformational ability to write code when you think about it as something as foundational, as critical as provider data?
By the way, it's a great question. And I think you described something that the technology teams are looking at probably every single day. If you put the risk lens on it, your normal trade-off is always what's the risk, what's the reward? And if you're trying to solve some relatively small problem, there normally isn't much reward for you to go try to introduce something that you've never seen before to go solve that particular problem. If it is a larger problem, there is a significant reward, and you can actually go down the path of seeing, how do I introduce something from the external world into my ecosystem? Similarly, if you're building it yourself, you also have to think about the flip side of it, which is if there's a proven solution that works well, yes, it may cost money, it may cost some effort to actually bring it in and manage it, but I know it's going to work well, and my whole service ultimately for my customers is going to work well. And if I try to shortchange that, I might find that I have just created some issue that it takes a while to overcome. And now I have put the customer trust, which is ultimately the number one thing you care about, at risk. So as long as you think in those two terms, what am I getting? What is it going to cost, or what the effort is going to be? I think you end up making good decisions.
That's really interesting. Earlier, you said, hey, the three things we want to evaluate. One of them was, is it a big enough problem? And now we're saying, hey, like a lot of times when you look at the small problems, the reward just isn't big enough to focus on. So you have to focus on the big problem. As an aside, is that way? And if you're evaluating risk and reward, what's your perception of, hey, like I was successful in my role because I had this risk tolerance, risk officer mindset and hat, but also knew how the technology functioned and could look at, okay, if we're looking at the reward side through technology, what is the risk there? I might be pulling at something that's not worth pulling on, but it was really interesting to me over those last two questions, Sam.
The interesting thing is no one gets it exactly right. And I'm pretty sure I didn't either. There are many places where you might over-index on risk, you might over-index on innovation and reward. As long as the organization, because it's not one person making these decisions, honestly. If it is, there's something wrong with that. But as you think about the leadership team and talent across the whole organization who are helping make these decisions, as long as you can honestly look back at decisions you have made that were meaningful decisions and learn from them, you'll keep on steering in the right direction in the future.
I was reading a Harvard Business Review article last week, and it said something along the lines of, it's not that leaders don't get things wrong. It's that oftentimes they're making these big decisions, and when they do, it's a big problem, but they do have to learn from it. So that really hits home for me personally. And now we're gonna have to try to find the article or the conversation that happened. So you find a big problem you want to solve. You analyze the risk and reward. As a leader in the technology space and as a leader at both the financial services industry and within healthcare, how'd you make buy versus build decisions in your leadership roles with the team you just mentioned? And now that AI, to go back to Mitch's question, now that AI is making building dramatically easier, how has the calculus changed on those decisions? What are the new considerations you have to think through as a leader, Sam?
The first part of your question, the buy versus build decisions, again, come back to what problem are you trying to solve?
Yeah.
Is that a problem that the industry you are in, or sometimes if it's a technology solution of some kind, it may even be cross industry. Is it a problem that a whole lot of other people also face? And as a result, is there a benefit to picking something that is innovative, it performs well, it is going to scale well? In those cases, you want to buy and you want to go just spend the time to make sure that between the alternatives you have of solving that problem, which is the best one for you, and buy. You typically still need to spend the time in implementing it, which you could argue is some version of build. All the wires still need to be connected, all the data flows need to be connected.
Yeah.
The solution you're bringing in needs to work with other solutions you have in place. So there is a build component even in buy, but it is more of an integration component. If you're truly building a unique product and a unique functionality, sometimes it makes sense to do it internally. If you have a platform and this is just going to be a small extension on that thing. If it is going to be a truly unique, large build, you better be sure it is strategically important for you and it is not a problem pretty much anyone else is trying to solve.
Yeah.
The number two in your question, how does AI change it, especially generative AI change this equation? Generative AI is still a very new technology. It's actually, I feel that it is more developed on the consumer side because you can interact with it quite easily as a consumer, and it can generate pictures, it can answer all kinds of questions. But when you try to put it into an operating system where you need a particular performance that you understand consistently over time, it still has some ways to go before people figure out exactly how to incorporate it at scale.
Yeah.
But it is going to change what we do and how we do it. And as long as you keep that eye towards how do I keep on bringing it in to solve problems in an entirely different way, I think you'll end up transforming the way consumer businesses work, but it's not going to happen overnight. So be mindful of every solution you're bringing in, which is old tech, if you will, has a payback period that is reasonable so that if AI ends up completely disrupting it, you have not put something in place that is hard to walk away from.
Yeah. I want to build off that a little bit. And I'm probably going to say it 100 times during this Provider Data Dorks podcast. We've heard from health plans countless times. We don't compete on the basis of provider data. Our data is not unique to us. How we use it might be, but what we just want is the best data. We don't compete on the basis of provider data. So when you say, ask yourself, is this something that other people are struggling with? Like, I think about our space and the answer is absolutely. And then the question becomes, and this is, Mitch, kind of bounce this to you because you see it all the time, is like, yes, it's a problem everybody solves or has to deal with. So we probably shouldn't build it. We should work with somebody that sees this every single day and it's all they're focused on. And they're learning from all of their partners that they're working with all the time. And then the build part becomes the implementation, the configuration, what you can do to localize that within your own system. I think it's a really interesting for you, Mitch, as you kind of work consistently with, all 434 health plans across the country.
Yeah, a couple of things there that Sam said that I found really fascinating. So Sam and I have spoken about this topic at length off camera. And Sam, I think you put it so bluntly and directly to me one time, which is if it's complicated and other people use it, you should buy it. And I don't think there's anything that really fits that description more than provider data. And then the other thing that was really interesting to me is that builders and technologists like building things. And I think it takes a really mature perspective to look at it from your angle and from the folks that report into you and say, hey, we can spend our time building cooler stuff, like making sure that everything's implemented correctly, making sure the wires are crossed correctly. Let's not spend all of our time building something that already exists before. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. Let's just make sure that the wheel fits onto our axis. And I think that's as we move into this next generation of AI, it's much more important to think about how everything integrates together than actually building the pieces themselves. So really, really interesting. We hear all the time about, hey, I can't really this sounds great. Would love to do something like this, but my budget is spoken for this year and usually for next year as well. But there's always this like secret transformation budget that exists. It's like this, this mythical transformation that if I can
Treasure chest.
show some sort of transformational change, I can dip into this budget. And we've been seeing that more and more now, especially with the release of AI. But when somebody walks into your office, Sam, and tells you that their product is transformational, what is your bar? What is your gut check for this is transformational and I can dip into a budget, my rainy day budget to make sure that this gets implemented?
One, I'm not sure that we had the kind of hidden pot that you're talking about. And you are managing a fairly large ecosystem and you're trying to break it down between what does it take to keep your operations running? Because that is your job number one in some ways. And then changing what you're doing is your job number two. And number two becomes more important as you're thinking about the longer horizon, but you don't quite get there unless you're taking care of number one. So when you're allocating those resources, I might reframe what you said somewhat differently, which is if something new and significantly better comes along, even in the middle of a year, you always have the decision authority to say, what am I going to slow down? What am I going to stop? And how do I fund this thing if it is important enough? And when those topics come up, I think the important part is how critical is it for whatever the organization's mission ultimately is. So if you're talking about healthcare, you might end up saying your primary need is that you need to create plans which are supporting the healthcare choices that consumers are making and taking away the risk of unknown expenses from them. That's your primary purpose. You want to make it easy to access and you want to make it affordable for your consumers. So if you're looking at a particular new solution and you're trying to invest in it, is it solving some or all of those problems? And if it is solving them significantly, you might end up reprioritizing fundamentally the choices you're making that particular year. I think the word transformational may be overused. And that's the one place you want to be careful, because if you're really saying transformational, it should be one of two things. Internet was transformational. Mobile phones were transformational. Gen AI is transformational. But these are technologies. It is really the application of those technologies to your business, which could be incrementally improving what you're doing, or it could actually be over 5 years, I want my company to look fundamentally different, and it's a transformation. If it is latter, I think you should start putting like 10 or 20% of your overall effort against it. Yeah. But that is a different choice than bringing in a technology and just making improvements to what you're doing.
Yeah. The solution to not chase the shiny object sometimes, especially if you're looking at it from a critical decision, like, am I going to give 20% of my time to this? Am I going to give every Thursday, every Friday, like a whole day of my work week to this? Is it that important, that transformational? Mitch, we got to stop using the word transformational, I guess. I love what we're doing in provider data, but I am not the internet. Not yet.
I actually love one thing you just said there. So many times the conversation is about the organization or the total funding over the year. But the way you said it made it so real, which is as an individual leader of the organization, are you willing to spend 20% of your time in a given week? And very quickly, you'll know whether it meets that bar or it doesn't.
Yeah, that's true from many perspectives. And I'll be asking that question more often now. I want to talk about the business a little bit. We see this all the time when we work with projects, and I'm going to frame it as we hear it from the chief information officers. But honestly, I hear it when I talk to the businesses. I hear it when I talk to the implementation teams. I do feel like I hear it across an organization. And I think this is like maybe a controversial statement, but part of the problem with health plans is there's these silos from time to time. But a lot of CIOs, a lot of leaders across health plans that we've had the pleasure of working with talk about the business, whether that's provider data, whether that's credentialing operations, whatever it is, the business and IT, information technology, engineering, the product org within the health plans. Like they're two separate nations, honestly. And they occasionally trade goods across the border, but they don't really know each other. They're just like, I kind of need you for X and you kind of need me for Y, but they're definitely separate. You've been the chief risk officer and the CIO at, at similar company, at the same company. So you've literally been the business stakeholder asking information technology for things and the IT leader on the receiving end of a lot of those asks. I imagine a lot crossed your desk. What does that dual experience tell you, Sam, about what good technology investment actually looks like or should look like in healthcare?
I think you're describing challenge that exists in every large organization, but it also exists in every team sport. Like imagine your quarterback and your receiver not being on the same page. You may have the same problem, right? And the key oftentimes is alignment on what the goal is. Because if you're aligned on the goal, then you can get aligned on the agenda and then you can get aligned on the execution.
Yeah.
And you are going to have different functions in any organization. To think that you're the person who's creating the product, even if you don't use the same language you're using, someone has to go design a really great product. Someone has to go design a really great service experience. Someone has to make sure that all the financial aspects of the business model hang together. Someone has to make sure that the technology works.
Everyone has a hat to wear. Yeah.
Exactly, right? You're going to need all those different expertise or experts in the mix. The more people organize around, well, what customer problem am I focused on? And then it doesn't matter which hat you're wearing, you will actually come together with potentially different points of view, but it allows the right conversations to happen. I have found many organizations, by the way, it isn't necessarily at the level of this company does it really well and this company doesn't.
Yeah.
It normally comes down to local pockets where people do it really, really well and local pockets where it doesn't work particularly well. That is a challenge for all leaders, honestly, to take on, because I think when that handshake happens well, you can do magical work. For a provider of a service like you, my advice always is be mindful that that challenge can exist, but don't do anything to make it worse. And to the extent you can, do whatever you can to make it better. So the less you use that language, honestly, the better it can be, because you are just then focusing on what are we trying to do, not who's trying to do what.
Super interesting perspective. What you're really getting at here, Sam, is that the leader is really, the coach of the team, right? Make sure the offense and the defense are marching towards the same goal, playing complementary football. And I think that, a lot of the times whenever things bubble up to the leader, it's usually because there's an issue that you need to handle. Usually there's a hard or tough decision that you need to make. And we see that a lot of times with provider data. Provider data typically bubbles up because there's an issue or there's a compliance risk. Have you ever seen provider data land on your desk as chief risk or chief investment information officer as a huge opportunity? And you said, hey, here, how can I leverage this asset to drive significant change downstream as opposed to just managing a compliance risk?
I don't think provider data as a topic ever landed on my desk. But what did land on my desk was take the entire core system functionality across the insurance part of the business, and how do you structure it, and how do you create an agenda on every part of it. So I think there are maybe 7 domains within that. I can imagine they are customer acquisition, claims, provider data would be one of those domains. But once you create that picture, which the team did a fantastic job of creating the picture and then putting all the different applications and all the different data flows and everything within that picture. So you start here with one single sheet of paper that says this is what the overall, city map looks like, but then you keep on going down into detail. And that created very specific initiative which said, I'm going to go change this part of the ecosystem. By the way, that's going to take, in some cases, 12, 18 months. In some cases, it was going to take a few years. But once you have created that picture, then you can start taking on challenges like provider data management. So even though I may not have directly spent a large amount of time there, I think the team had actually created the means by which you could go solve it.
Yeah. Mitch is working to give us a layup, so I'm gonna steal the layup from him a little bit. You were the CIO, but now I'm making you the health plan CEO. Congratulations. It's a big moment. But imagine you're the health plan CEO today and someone hands you just a clean slate, to redesign how your health plan handles provider data end to end. What do you actually change first? How do you think about addressing that problem in the clean slate or clean opportunity you have in front of you, Sam?
Let's start by making an assumption. Let's make an assumption that that's the number one challenge that the CEO decides.
That's fair. We'll make up any rules we want for this question for sure.
Yeah, let's make that assumption because then it puts it in the right space for a CEO, honestly.
Yeah.
But once you have done that, it fits the criteria of if you solve it well, you will be able to do so many things better for your customers. It fits the criteria of it is a problem that all your peer companies also face. And if you were to solve it, it would fundamentally be better for the whole industry. It would make it more efficient. It'll allow many things to work better. And once you know that it fits those two criteria, you'd probably take the step of pulling together all your peers because there are many places CEOs get together in a given industry. You pull your peers together and say, what are the 1, 2, or 3 things that we can do to make this problem solvable for the overall industry? And that can lead to creation of standards. It can lead to creation of a co-invested entity, as in companies have done that successfully before. It can lead to a place where you get together on a regular basis to keep on moving the ball forward, and you can invite a company or 3 who can actually solve that particular problem. But your job normally is 1, decide if it's a big enough problem. 2, once you have decided it is, declare that it is. And number 3, create the structure within that problem can actually be solved and give it the right level of resources. I think if you do those things, people who know how to solve that problem can actually go solve that problem.
I call them the 3 Ds unofficially. Decide, big enough problem. Declare, it is a big problem. And then design a solution. And I think when you're walking through the design, so many of those design solutions go together. It's like create an organization, create standards, find vendors that we can trust to work through those. It may not just be one of those. So many of those things come together. So we'll send it to Harvard Business Review for the second citation with them today. Like, here's our 3 Ds for how a CEO can fix an industry-wide problem.
I actually heard 2 more Ds there, so we can make it the 5 Ds. But I heard there debate with your peers and debate with other CEOs who are dealing with the same problems, debate with your team, and then delegate to your trusted leaders and your trusted lieutenants to go ahead and solve the problem. And I think, Sam, what the theme that I'm really taking out of this conversation with you is just that the leader's job is to put lieutenants in place that can execute on the design, execute on the strategy, and then get out of the way and let them do their work. And I think you've really shown that throughout your career and even in this conversation. We'll finish this up with a couple questions just around AI, since that's obviously the main hot topic that we're hearing about right now. But provider data is this messy, unstructured. It's contradictory across all these different data sources. It's always changing. And you had actually compared this earlier when you were talking about fintech, and you said, hey, in the financial services space, we have the benefit of having a ton of structured data there. And I think that's some of the challenges that we see in healthcare, but specifically provider data, is that it is unstructured, it is messy, it is continuously changing. And that is exactly the type of problems that LLMs are reasonably good at. So where does AI genuinely move the data as you think about these large, unstructured, messy data sets of provider data? And where are people kidding themselves? Where should they stop spending their time?
It's a great question. By the way, I'm not sure that I have the clarity of exactly how you go about solving it. But I'm sure that there are a whole bunch of smarter folks who can go figure it out. At the end of the day, the real world is unstructured. And you can imagine that one of the challenges you're talking about with provider data is you have an individual who's working within a particular practice, and they're working within some particular location if the practice has multiple locations. And if they end up switching the practice, suddenly all the data that you have in the system somewhere is stale. That is part of the challenge that you are trying to solve. I feel like LLMs can take data which is not normalized. LLMs can take all kinds of input data from all kinds of different sources and be able to pull out something that is structured at the end of it. And they can do it quite well, and they can do it quite efficiently. So it will help solve the problem. I continue to feel like you still have to go create what's the structure that those LLMs are then going to populate. Because once you solve that, then all the different entities can actually access that same structure, and they have relatively low latency on the accuracy of that data, because individuals will continue to change what they do in the physical world. The real challenge is that change reflected in your data structure and how quickly it is reflected in the data structure. So LLMs, again, I feel have the ability to take in all kinds of stuff and very quickly populate that. But the bigger problem in my mind is there isn't an alignment on what that structure is that you're going to populate.
Yeah, really, really valuable technology. But until we all get aligned, until we all get a structure, until we all have standards, might be just making a messy problem even worse.
Do you think the way LLMs can think so fast these days, like how critical is the structure? And I'm thinking about that from two lenses. One is like internally within a health plan. How do business, I've heard from national plans that they have like 1,600 business stakeholders for provider data. Like that's not a small number. With that many stakeholders, could an LLM make it easier for them to engage? Business stakeholder says, hey, I need X report every 24 hours or every week, whatever it may be. And I also think of it from my selfish standpoint as a consumer of healthcare. I'll spare everybody the long story, but got a claim that I was surprised by. Whereas if I was able to go to, my health plans directory and say, hey, I am Nick Helfrich. Here's my plan. I'm looking for this service. Where should I go? Like how much easier would that have been than me searching, assuming, and ultimately making the wrong decision on where to get healthcare? Does the structure, are LLMs getting smart enough that we at some point will need less structure and it can work through these problems if you get the right engineers focused on it?
Maybe is what I would honestly say today.
What I was worried about.
Maybe ultimately depends on, are you trying to solve a problem uniquely every single time? And if you are uniquely trying to solve it every single time, maybe something like LLMs is a good answer, because it can take completely different inputs and a completely different question you're asking and solve it reasonably well. But efficiency and speed also matter. And if efficiency and speed matter, and you are going to solve that problem hundreds, thousands, millions, billions of times, then are you better off solving it one particular way? So you use the LLM to solve it, but then you codify it in a way that is way more efficient and way faster for you to solve it for the next 10,000 people who come about looking for same or similar information. I think that's the structure that you have to figure out. And depending on the nature of the problems you're talking about, maybe LLMs is the only answer, or maybe LLMs are part of the answer.
That scale is so important in healthcare. I think there are a lot of AI-based companies solving a niche problem in a niche area, and that scale is a little different. But for us, it's like you said billions, and that is a realistic number for how many times certain problems will have to get solved. So that scale is critical. And AI in the LLM sense may not always be the most efficient way to solve a problem a billion times when you need the exact same answer every time. And the answer is binary and there can't be any hallucinations. It's really compelling.
I think that's something that technology leaders or even business leaders, as AI gets in the hands of non-technical folks now, need to remember is, are you using the right tool for the problem that you're trying to solve? Not every hole can be dug with the same shovel or the same pickaxe. So
that's a great way to put it.
Questioning what kind of shovels I own. Only two types. Actually, I have like 3 or 4 types of shovels. We'll talk about that another day.
You have 3 or 4 more types of shovels than I do, Nick. But you live in Missouri and I live in New York City. So
it's the truth. That's the truth. Hey, you get the shovel.
I love buying those kinds of tools. When we had a snowstorm and which turned into an ice storm here, a snow shovel really doesn't work anymore, and you need something that is
a little stronger,
way more sturdy to chunk through all that particular ice. One of my happiest moments was local Home Depot had run out of everything. But through the power of technology that we are talking about here, you can actually buy things which are not at your local store. And when the $60 shovel showed up at my front door, I was really happy.
this is the right tool.
I'm just imagining Sam going on ChatGPT or Claude and saying, this shovel is really not working for me. It's currently 28 degrees outside. This is where I live. Please help me. Yeah, sure. We'll have that over to you in about 3 minutes.
So we know what your favorite shovel is. What's your favorite, what are you using AI for the most these days? What's your favorite application of AI, personally and professionally?
Almost any research on almost any topic.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if you are trying to figure out, this corner of healthcare, and the industry is so vast that it would be very hard for an individual to know every aspect of it. But whenever you keep on running into some new aspect and you're trying to get educated on that, it's a fantastic tool compared to the old way of doing a web search. Number two, it's a really great tool when you're trying to think through a particular problem. So not business related, but we were trying to make a decision about either fixing some problems in a bathroom or actually doing a major refurbish or rebuild of the bathroom. And you can imagine, you can go to an AI tool and even say, this is the problem I'm trying to solve, and literally speak to it, even though that sounds kind of funny when you're not speaking to a human being on the other side, and even say, ask me 3 questions before you even give me any suggestion. I'll tell you the 3 questions it asked me were fantastic. And when I gave it answers, it made the problem even clearer in my own mind. And I had an idea of what I wanted to do, and I had an idea of how much it was going to cost. It not only got all those things right, it actually told me what to expect once you got going and how much the cost would rise and which kinds of problems you're going to run into. It was actually accurate about all of those. So I think it has many applications, largely in the space of problem solving and largely in the space of research for me.
Context is the most powerful input that you can ever have here, right? So I love that you're training your own AI model, Sam. Say, hey, before you give me an answer, you should ask me 3 questions. And honestly, as leaders, we should try to remember to ask that of our teams. Hey, before I'm giving you an answer, am I making sure to ask you a couple of different questions to make sure that I have all angles of the situation? And that goes true for, painting your bathroom or refurbishing your bathroom. It rings true for being a leader. It rings true for implementing a new provider data system. Yeah, really interesting.
I did just ask AI, speaking of deep research, how many types of shovels there are. They couldn't give me an exact count of shovels, but there's 8 categories of shovels. So
we'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, put that one in the show notes. I want to ask one more question, and then Mitch is going to guide us through a little lightning round here. But my last question is zooming out from provider data. For any healthcare leader investing in technology right now, whether it's cloud, AI, modernization, transformation, what's the advice you'd give them? And what's the trap you'd warn them about at the same time?
Stop using the word transformation.
Yeah, I snuck it in there.
Well, you should think transformation, but just don't overuse it. Apply it to the right things. I think for any large, complex organization, you're going to end up with technologies which are multi-generational. And I think it is unrealistic to think that you're going to replace all of it all at one time and end up with a completely clean stack. Mm-hmm. So how do you think back from what business problem are you trying to solve? Where do you want to be in 5 years or 10 years? And even though you can't actually go create a path for those next 5 or 10 years, the benefit of thinking that way is you will end up prioritizing the right things to do over the next 2 to 3 years, which is a good planning horizon. The second thing it'll do is it'll end up creating a structure that is more durable than the path that you actually pick within that structure right now. And in a year's time, you can keep on coming back to it and say, okay, what new has happened? What was successful? What technology has changed? What priorities have changed? And now you are continuing to build on the same outcome in some ways, but you are more agile to the changes that are happening between here and there. If you bring that kind of thinking, it's of course business first thinking, but then you apply it to how does it apply to my technology ecosystem? I think you'll continue to make good choices. On the other hand, if you're just picking individual projects, I think you're missing the big picture. That is a trap you can avoid.
Super interesting, Sam. Thank you so much. This has been such an enlightening conversation, one that Nick and I have been looking forward to for a long time. It's rare that we get to speak to somebody with your experience, not just from a leadership standpoint, but across these two very different and yet very similar industries. So your perspective here has been some really, really interesting. Some things that I've really taken away from this conversation. Number one, I've heard you say multiple times throughout the interview, what is the business problem that you were trying to solve? What is your North Star? What is your end goal? And then what is the full context that can help you get there? Make a strategy and delegate to your leaders. So really interesting, Sam. Thank you so much. We're going to jump through a quick lightning round here. So a few just quick questions. First thing that comes to mind. But what is your one big wish that you have for healthcare?
2, easier to use and affordable.
Easier to use and affordable. Any thoughts on how to get there?
I think it'll take some work between all the major players in the healthcare industry, working hand in hand with the government. But I think as you look at what an individual's experience looks like right now, I think there is a lot of room for improvement.
Sam, what's on your nightstand right now?
Sapiens.
Love Sapiens. I have both the full book. I also have the graphic novel. Just when I'm, feeling like I just need to see this in pictures.
It's always a book too, Mitch. All these leaders, like if there's one thing we can learn is we all need to be reading more.
That's for sure. All right, Sam, last one. Your best or worst piece of advice you've ever gotten in your career?
Best piece of advice I got was from a colleague. And he said, people don't remember what you said. People remember how you made them feel.
I will always say you've always made us feel heard and smart for being in your presence, Sam. So thank you very much for your time. Thanks a lot for your wisdom here today and for giving us the generosity of your experience here. So it's a pleasure talking to you. And looking forward to releasing the episode and hearing more.
Thanks, Sam.
So great to see both of you. And I will go research the 8 different types of shovels.
Don't go too deep on that one. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Sam. Have a good one.
Thank you. You as well.